Marshall called me some time ago and asked me if I would speak on Baba's birthday, and without thinking about it, I said yes. And since that time, I've been wondering why I said yes. Because, well, it's a very special thing, isn't it? And of course, I've talked before and told funny stories, and I'm really kind of at a loss about how to celebrate Baba's birthday. For me, it's a fantastic thing to be here and to see all the people that I know and the ones that I don't know yet. And I just thought, what can I do but tell about things that I know that I've been through, mainly stories of my time with Margaret Craske as a dancer, some of them which you've heard before. And in thinking about it, I was rummaging through a box and I came across a lot of letters from Miss Craske. Well, not a lot, but some. Don't look at me, Sheila, you're not getting them. And they typify, those of you who knew her know already, and those that have never met her or haven't had the chance to be exposed to her will see. It's an approach to Baba that's very unique, I think, and something in a sense that's kind of receding into the past, I feel. She was, I don't want to make this a talk about Margaret Craske, it's really about Baba. It's about how she brought us to Baba. Okay, I guess I have to go back and tell a little of the background. I went in 1951 to the Metropolitan Opera Ballet School to start to study dancing. And I was there first, of course, in the beginning class and then in a step up into intermediate class. And all the time that I was there, I saw this woman. She was teaching the more advanced classes, but I was not in her class. And yet I could see there was something special about her, what I didn't know. One day, a summons came to me to appear in her class as an audition to see if I was ready. Well, I have to tell you, never ready, not for her. And I went. I didn't want to go. I had been studying with a woman who had been a pupil of Miss Craske in London, and I just adored her, and I was really upset that I might have to leave her. I didn't want to go to Miss Craske at all. I went to the class, and I was really, really nervous, and my knees knocking, the whole business, and I did the class, whatever it was, she accepted me into her class. And during all that time, no one spoke of Baba. Miss Craske never talked about Baba openly. It was a time when people didn't know about those things. I always like to tell this story about Miss Craske when she was working. She came to America after having been in India on the invitation of a ballet company, American Ballet Theatre, and she was a ballet mistress there, and she taught class and held rehearsals. And you know, in ballet, the women, often in classical ballet, they wear a skirt called a tutu, which is made out of a kind of gauze tarlatan stuff. And people knew that she'd been in India. And you know the story about how the yogis cleanse themselves with gauze or whatever? And one day, one of these tutus disappeared. And the story went around that she'd eaten it, Miss Craske. Seriously. That's how, you know, we didn't know anything. And those people who had already been introduced to Baba and met Baba, Tex Hightower, for example, who you must know, Maria Dare, didn't talk to us about Baba. In 1954, I got a job in Williamsburg, Virginia, the home of the Socalases, the Gluras, the Eatons, or whatever Eatons to be. And Marie and I and this other fellow named Peter Saul wound up working in this historical pageant in Williamsburg called the Common Glory. We were everything from colonial revolutionaries to Indians, and had a scene with Pocahontas. And but that whole summer, I found Peter sneaking around and sitting out in the moonlight with Marie and playing the recorder and listening to poetry and talking about something, and I was like very scornful of this. I just thought it was awful, sentimental, and I don't know. In the fall, we all went back to New York, and Peter, who had not yet studied with Miss Craske, but came under the spell of her through Marie, who was teaching our company classes, came to New York to the Met to study with Miss Craske. And Peter and I had become quite good friends, but rivals at the same time, so we fought a lot. And he wanted my roles and I wanted his. They weren't much to be fought over, but we were very serious. And so we had this very good friendship, but at the same time this rivalry. And one night after class, I went out with Peter for coffee on 42nd Street, which in those days you still could do. And we were sitting there and we started having another one of our famous arguments. And at one point, Peter got so exasperated, he looked at me and he said, you know, you're so awful, the only thing that could help you is Meher Baba. And I said, well, what's that? And I see, it's kind of weird. I'd been around already, say, 3 or 4 years around Miss Craske. Peter was absolutely brand new. He just heard about Baba like a month ago, and he was going to tell me all about it. So he told me about reincarnation, and I thought, well, that's very sensible. I really like that. And so I said, how can I find out about that? So he said, you have to ask Miss Craske. Now, you see, Miss Craske never openly sought people to follow her. She never mentioned Baba's name. As a matter of fact, for years, she referred to Baba as B, with us. We had a message from B, not from Baba. It was because people would react to it in a non-accepting, perhaps aggressive way. So finally, I got up enough nerve and I went to her. She had a dressing room. After class, she'd give people advice about how to fix their little toe or hold their head or their back or something, to do with the dance classes. And I went in and I said, Miss Craske, could I know about Meher Baba? And she said, yes, you can. And I said, well, I don't know if I'm good enough for that. And she said, well, my dear, Baba's even for criminals. So that made me feel better. And I made an appointment to go to see her in her hotel room. And I don't know if any of you some of you have been up there, I'm sure, in that room, which was not anything fancy, I can assure you. But one of the boys told me that her room, when you go there, it's going to be all blue lights, and there are gongs and incense and mists, and she's all in veils and all this stuff. So I was really, I didn't know. But it wasn't like that at all. She was perfectly, wonderfully human and down to earth and full of common sense. And she, over the years, when I and the other dancers would go to her in her hotel room to talk about Baba, talked about Baba in a way to make him live for us, to awaken our love for him. There was not really any talk of discourses or theory, a little bit maybe, but more than anything, it was her stories of her life with Baba and how she made him alive for us. Before Baba came, in a funny kind of way, in '56, in a funny kind of way, we knew him already. Well, at least we thought we knew him already. She was a very stern disciplinarian in class. See, we got a double whammy. Okay, we had the classes with her, which was a training, and then this with Baba, and the two crossed over, and oftentimes in class, the thing of Baba would cross over with what you were doing in class, and of course nobody else knew why she was throwing you out of class, but that was had something to do with yourself and how you behaved. So anyway, we had Peter and Marie and Tex and I and Viola and a woman named Susan all lived in the same building, or Tex actually just lived in one behind us. So we would make appointments to see Miss Craske in her hotel room, and when we would finish with her, we'd come back to the ashram on 49th Street, and we'd all get together and share the stories that she told. And I remember Miss Craske had an old, falling apart shoebox with a few photos in it. And sometimes, she would give us a photo, but it wasn't like now. There were so few photos to have. She gave me The Perfect Master to read. That was my first book. And eventually the discourses, but she never made a big issue of the discourses. She made an issue only of her love for Baba and our love for Baba. And I have some letters, which I'll read excerpts to you in a little bit, which just somehow to me illustrate how she was and how we were brought into Baba's fold, so to speak. It wasn't easy. Studying with her was very hard for anybody, and it was more than that hard for us, because everything related to Baba. And I have to tell you, I'll speak for myself, I was so ignorant of anything. I had no idea what I was getting into. I had no idea what it was all about. And I had no idea where it was going to go to. I just knew that there I was. Well, you'll ask me, well, I still don't know what it's all about or where I'm going to. No, I know something now, but not like then. And Miss Craske had a hard time with me, a very hard time, because I had my own mind about a lot of things, and I was very, very temperamental. And I would get frustrated in class, not being able to do this or do that, and stop in the middle of something in a rage and stamp my feet and just be frozen, and people would crash into me and pile up, and it was a general nuisance. One day, and I know I've told this story before, but I think that's it. I was in class, and at the beginning of a ballet class, you have exercises at the bar, which is a bar is just what it sounds like. It's a bar that's attached to the wall, and you hold on to it with one hand, and you do exercises with one foot, which the teacher tells you what to do, and then you turn around and you do the other side. So there we were, and I was at this bar, and I'm standing here, and behind me was Tex, who I absolutely thought was the cat's meow. He was already a professional dancer, and there was nothing greater than Tex, I thought. Nobody knew more than Tex, and nobody was more spiritual and more wonderful. And there he was behind me. And Miss Craske gave this exercise. She said, you do 4 here and 4 here and 4 here, whatever, 16. And, it all comes out into 16s or 12s or something. And she said, start. And the music started, and I started, and I looked around, and nobody was doing what I was doing. They were doing something else. And I thought, you know what? Nobody here understands her but me. They didn't hear it. I was really kind of annoyed, Then, of course, when we turned around, Tex was in front of me, not behind me, you see. And she said, and, pianist chord, and we started. And I looked at his feet, and he was doing what everybody else was doing and not what I was doing. And I went into a complete rage that he had, he was a betrayal. And he doesn't know either, and I'm the only one and so I stopped. And Miss Craske saw me stop, and she clapped her hands, and everybody stopped. And she said, why have you stopped? And I said, well, Miss Craske, they're all doing the wrong exercise. And she said, never mind, just get on with it. So she started the music again, and of course I was getting like, apoplectic. I probably had steam coming out of my ears, and I couldn't, I was frozen. I was in one of those, what's a cataleptic? Isn't that better than apoplectic? And I couldn't. She said, and the music played, everybody started their legs going, and there I stood. And so she stopped again, and she looked at me with a really horrible way and said, either go on with the exercise or leave the class. Something like that. And I looked at her, and I thought, well, and I marched myself out of the class, marched into the dressing room, put on my clothes, and ran out of the studio. Downstairs, there was a kind of greasy spoon, we called it, a kind of really crummy coffee shop. And I sat there and I thought, well, when the class is over, I'm going back up there and I'm going to get up all my clothes and stuff, my shoes, and I'm going to pack them up and I'm going to go to another school, and that's the end of the whole thing. No more ballet with Miss Craske, and no more Baba, and no more nothing. So horrible. So I waited till I thought the coast was clear, and when everybody was gone, and I went back up to the studio, which was up in one of the upper floors of the old Metropolitan Opera House. And there wasn't anybody there, but there was this little old lady who was the secretary. She'd been there like 49 years, and she'd seen Caruso sing and Pavlova dance and everything. And she was Miss Craske like a lion. You could not say anything across Miss Craske, because she would get you. This little lady, Kathleen Harding. She was about 3 feet high, I think, with bleary eyes, And I loved her because she always used to give me rubber bands to hold my socks up. And I went in there, and she came out of the office, and she said, I'm sorry, but you cannot come back to class until you apologize to Miss Craske. And I said, well, I'm never going to apologize to her, and that's too bad. And I left, you see. And I went home, and I sat in my apartment, if you can call it that, and pondered on this thing, and I got depressed, and I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know any other school to go to, and I don't know Baba, and Tex called me up, and what's going on, and people were very worried, and for like 3 days or more, I sat there. Of course I went out to shop or whatever. I don't mean to say that I buried myself, but I just was, again, paralyzed, but in a different way. There was no way out of this thing, so I found myself one day in front of the hotel that she lived in, the Wellington. And then I found myself in the lobby, and then I found myself at the house phone, and then I found myself calling her up. And I said, yes, on the other hand, I said, it's Donald. And there's this silence. You're like, no help at all. And I said, well, I think I better come up and see you. And she said, I think you better had. Boom, slam the phone down like this. Does this sound familiar to you, Beth? It must. She gave you probably a harder time, you ladies that took care of her. Not just you. I know you're, okay. So I went up there, again, knees knocking, you know, and I knocked on the door, and she opened the door. Well, she had made no attempt to look nice, okay? Her hair, she had very long hair in those days. Did she still have long hair at the, she had she hadn't put it up. She always wore it up in a tight little bun at the back, and it was just hanging down. No makeup in her house. She really looked awful. She looked, I hate to say she looked like a witch, but it was something like that. And she opened the door and ushered me in. And I was about to start to explain, and she said, why did you do that? And I, well. She said, if you had loved me, you wouldn't have done that. And I looked at her kind of starting to crack, and she said, and what's more, you don't love Baba. Bang, you know, it just, the whole thing fell away. I mean, of course, I was dissolved in tears and all of that stuff, and it went away. And after that, that was kind of a breaking point. And I'm not to say that I was good after that. I wasn't, because she threw me out of class many times because I would still do that. And I have to kind of jump ahead a little bit. This is going to be very rambling, unorganized talk. This thing I had of being frustrated and stopping and stamping my feet and in the rage of frustration, you know, there was came a time when I had this wonderful opportunity, this job to send books to Baba in India. He wanted these Nero Wolfe murder mysteries or P.G. Wodehouse, and the ones that were out of print was my job to find them because I knew something about that. And I sent him a lot of books, and he started referring to me as Donald Duck. And Mani even said, oh, he had a sign for me, you know, he would go like this. Is that story so horrible? And I thought, you know, isn't that cute? Donald Duck. And I have all this, you know, not dozens, but letters and postcards from Mani saying Baba sends his love to his dear Donald Duck and stuff like that. And it was, you know, this is a cute thing. And years and years and years later, I was watching television one night, and there was this Walt Disney special. And it was a Donald Duck film that had been put together from many films. And in this film, in this story, Donald Duck was the star of the Walt Disney Studios. And his arch rival was Mickey Mouse. And guess what? Donald Duck was very temperamental, and he went into rages all the time and stomped his feet and screamed and quacked. And it got very, very bad, and then people started not wanting to work with him. And the director said he was too difficult, and the other movie actors and actresses didn't want to work with him. And Daisy Duck, his girlfriend, gave up on him, and she didn't want to see him anymore, and all his friends fell away, and then he got fired. And he was like way, way down, and he didn't understand. And he went to a psychiatrist, and he did, you know, health food or whatever, and nothing worked. And then one day, he fell asleep and he had a dream. And in the dream, he saw himself as others saw him. And I finished the program, and I was like... Because, you see, one of the things that was very pervasive in me was that Baba didn't know who I was. When we were with him, even. You know, that he saw me, but he didn't, I was nothing special. He didn't know who I was. And I thought, oh my God, you idiot. You know, he's calling you Donald Duck. It's not cute at all. That is what you are, you know. This is, he really knows. So that's kind of an example. Now, where was I? I was back there with Miss Craske. In 1956, Baba sent a message that he was coming to the West, and he would be in New York. And I had just then gotten a job in Canada in a ballet company. And I, you know, almost simultaneously with his arrival in New York, I had gone up to Canada. And I got permission to come down to New York for the weekend to meet Baba. And the night before Baba arrived, it was very, very hot. I really can never forget this. It was so hot in New York, and I stayed in Peter's apartment, which was one floor below where my apartment had been. And he had Viola's cat had given birth, and they were like 100 kittens. And all night long they were clawing me, running around on the sheet, with their little claws. So there wasn't much sleeping going on. And then in the morning we all got together, and with Miss Craske, we went out to Idlewild then, it was JFK, to see Baba arrive. We didn't know anything. There was no program. There was nothing. We just knew he was getting there at such and such a time, and we should just go. And so there we were, very, very early in the morning. And the first thing I remember was we went to this greasy spoon countertop place to have something to eat. And Miss Craske ordered scrambled eggs. And she leaned on it and it flipped up in the air and it landed in her lap. And she was covered in scrambled eggs. And she said, I don't know why I ordered that. I didn't want it. Everybody was nervous. She was nervous, I think. And finally, we were standing there in a group, myself, Marie, Tex, Viola, a bunch of us around Miss Craske, and Ivy Deuce, Marishita Deuce, was standing over there, and she saw us, and she came over to us. And she looked at Miss Craske and said, Margaret, what a wonderful group you have. And Miss Craske looked at her in that way she only could, and she said, they're not my group. And Ivy said, oh, I only mean to say, that they're... She said, no, never mind. She said, it's not that I don't love them, I just don't claim them. Which is so typical of her. We didn't belong to a group. There was the New York group at that time, and many people belonged to it, but we didn't. We just were a different kind of thing. We were free of any kind of organization. We were wild gypsies or whatever you want to call it. And we never went to any of those things except very occasionally. And Fred and Alla were so sweet because whenever a movie would come from India and they'd show it for the meeting, they would invite us separately to their apartment to show this movie. It wasn't that we hated anybody else. That's what we were like. We would do, and also we were younger at that time. No longer. So there we were, and finally Baba's plane landed. And the first I saw of Baba was through a big plate glass window, I guess coming through the immigration. And he was in his pink coat and very, very glowing. It was in the distance, but you could see this. And then he came into this hall where everybody was lined up all down this hall. And he came down the row of people and he would see somebody and he went to Peter and chucked his chin, and Miss Craske. There was a personal thing for most of the people there, and I thought, aha, this is going to be it. Baba's going to see me, and he said, oh, how wonderful you're here. I've been expecting you or something, and he walked right past me, didn't even look. That was my first experience of Meher Baba. And then he went outside, and I think you may have seen in the movies where he got into a convertible. And the top started coming down. Somebody said, no, they wanted a picture, and the top went back up again. And anyway, he went into New York, and we got in cars and went back to New York, had breakfast, and went to the Delmonico to officially meet Baba. And we were out in a kind of antechamber when we were asked to come in, the dancers. And in this room, Miss Craske was standing near the door, and Baba was reclining, semi-reclining on that chaise lounge, which was covered in a white kind of bedspread thing. And by his right side was a bowl of fruit. And one of the Mandli was standing, I guess it may have been Erich, but I don't know, I don't remember anymore. And Miss Craske introduced each one of us to him by name. This is Maria Dare, this is... And when my turn came, she said, and this is Donald Mahler, and I went up to Bob, I sat down on the chaise lounge on the side, and he embraced me and I embraced him, and I put my face on his cheek, which was, Baba was so, people always ask me, what was he like? And it's so hard because he was like so many things. He was soft and yielding and accepting and receiving, and at the same time he was the other. He was giving and powerful and exuding this I don't know what you want to call it, charisma or something. And I was just, someone once said, this is not me saying this, but someone once said that when they had met Baba the first time, they felt not only that they had come home, which is a kind of trite thing, but they never wanted to leave because that's where they belong. And that is really exactly what I felt. I just was hanging on. And finally, I felt a hand kind of push me gently away. And Baba gave me a piece of fruit as prasad, and I left. And that was my first meeting with him. And so we all went out into this antechamber, and then we thought, well, what? Nobody told us come back at 3 or don't come back ever again or whatever. So we just waited, and then all of a sudden we were called in again, everybody who's there. And then we got the picture that if you stayed around, he would call you. So we went into this room a number of times. The next day, it was arranged for Baba to go on a sightseeing tour. And one of the groups had arranged for a bus to take Baba around Manhattan. And they all had assigned seats and everything. So we said, oh, we'll go in the morning and we'll just be there and watch them go off, because it was another chance to see Baba. We had no idea of going on the trip, but we just thought. So we arrived there, and the bus was standing on the curb at the Delmonico on Park Avenue. And Baba was standing on the sidewalk, and I came out and I stood next to him, and I was looking at him, and people were getting on the bus, and I thought, all of these people in New York are walking past him and not looking, you know, and I thought, how many people go to Jerusalem, for example, to walk where they maybe Jesus walked, you know, and here he is standing on the sidewalk. And that's what was going through my mind. And Baba was waiting with his hands in his pockets, and finally the bus was loaded, and Baba then got on into a seat quite near the front on the curbside. And he looks out the window, and he sees us standing out there, and he says, you know, come on the bus. And we went, no, because we hadn't been invited, and there weren't any seats. And Baba was going, come on the bus, and we were shaking our heads no. And we saw Baba say something to one of the Mandalay men, and this Mandalay man came out, and again, I don't remember who it was, and said to us, Baba wants to know why you're not getting on the bus. So we said, well, this bus was arranged, and it's fine, you know, there's no place for us. We don't mind. We're so happy to see Baba and see you off. It's fine. Don't worry about it, you know. So this man went back on the bus, and I saw him lean over to Baba and say to him, I guess explain, how come you get this special seat there? It's very nice. I like it. It's a focal point. So I saw this man lean to say something in Baba's ear, and Baba looked up, sort of surprised, and looked out the window, and he went, come on the bus. And we went, no. And he did it again, and we kept saying no. And so finally the Mandalay man came out off the bus and said, Baba says that if you don't get on the bus right now, he's not going. And so we got on the bus. I can tell you how fast we got on that bus. And Baba had all the people in the back seat, you know, the one that goes across the width of the bus, get up and squeeze into the places, which I know they didn't like, I'm sure. And we all sat down on this back seat, and Baba turned around and looked at us and went like this, and off we went. And you know, that was, to me anyway, an example of Baba's way of breaking something without saying, you know, what is this you horrible people have done? You haven't invited the dancers, you know. He wouldn't do that. He just did this like this, and there we were, and there they were, and off we went on this trip. Did you understand what I'm saying? He didn't lay down a rule or make a statement. So we had that sightseeing trip with Baba. Anyway, and then there was the dinner at Longchamp, so I won't go on about that. Then Baba went off around the United States with the dancers. Baba went around the United States with all the people that could go, and 4 of the dancers went with him, and I had to go back to Canada to my job. And evidently on that trip around the country, Baba asked the 4 dancers at one point to dance for him in the hotel room, and they were not prepared. They didn't have any music, they didn't have any costumes, they didn't know what to do, there was no space, and they did whatever they could do, of course, because Baba asked for it, and they all said they were very embarrassed by this, not being ready to do it. And they had decided that if Baba ever came again, they would prepare something, a program for Baba, if in case he asked. They didn't ask to dance for him, they just had a program prepared. And at that time, I was on a 4-month bus tour across the United States, Canada, and eventually to Mexico. And I had decided that I wasn't going to go to see Baba in '58 because my job was the thing I had to do, and I had to be loyal to the company, and all that stuff. And so I wrote to Marie, and I said, I'm not coming because of blah, 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 blah. And I got a telegram back saying, call Miss Craske. And I did, and I called Miss Craske, and this is like the only time, believe me, that she ever interfered and put her foot down and said, do this. She said, what is this I hear about you not coming to see Baba? And I said, well, she said, never mind. She said, the only thing that matters is that you see Baba. And I said, well, it was 1 week before he was coming, and we were in the middle of this tour. I said, well, how can I do that? I guess I'll have to speak to the director of the company. And she said, you do that. And I said, well, what if she says no? And Miss Craske said, well, you just leave it up to Baba and you see. So I went to see this woman who was the director of the company. And I said, you know, I have to blah, blah, blah. She said, you are the most horrible person I've ever met in my life. You did this and you did that, and you never do this and you never do that, and I don't like the way you work, and blah, you know, she proceeded to tear me apart. And I said, yes, but can I go to see Meher Baba? And she said, no, because you're the most, I never have seen anybody like you. You know, I mean, it went on and on like that. And every time I asked for permission, she just ranted about how horrible I was. So finally it came down to, she said, well, I'll have to call back to Toronto and ask the board of directors. I mean, this is so totally ridiculous. You know, you don't ask the board of directors if a dancer can, you know, be excused. So what she did, it was interesting, she absolutely destroyed every shred of loyalty I had to her and the company, and I marched myself right downstairs and I booked tickets to go to Myrtle Beach. And the next day I got permission to go. And as it turned out, I didn't miss anything very much in the way of work. And so here I came down to Myrtle Beach. And that was a kind of strange thing too, because I didn't know where Myrtle Beach was and I didn't know anything about it. And I flew, somehow or other, got to Wilmington. And there I was, and I was standing out on the sidewalk in front of the terminal, and I didn't know how to get here. So I just stood there, and then there was a man standing next to me, a very well-dressed man, and a big black limousine pulled up. And the man started to get into this car, and he turned around to me and he said, are you going to Myrtle Beach? And I said, well, yes. So he said, would you like to come along? I said, oh, of course. So I got in the car and we drove along quite in silence straight away. And then all of a sudden he turned around to me and he said, are you going to see Meher Baba? And I said, yes, I am. And then he didn't say any more. He dropped me off at the motel where I was going to stay, and he went away. And I promise you, I never saw that man again. I mean, really. I know, I hate to talk about, you know, it could be that he was there. We were so, anyway, I want to just tell the story about the dancing for Baba. When I got there, I found out that the dancers had prepared this program, costumes, music, they'd rehearsed it, and they hadn't told me about it. And I said, well, why didn't you tell me about it? They said, well, you told us you weren't coming, so we didn't tell you. Yes, but I want to be in this program, you know. And they said, well, they didn't want to say no. So I said, I'm going to do it. And I went to Miss Craske, I said, Miss Craske, I'm going to be in this program. And she looked at me with this very icy stare. I didn't say anything. And then I thought about it, and I tried this, and I tried that, and I didn't have any preparation, I had no costumes, no music, nothing. And the more I tried to think of what to do, the less there was for me to do. So finally I gave up, and I went to Miss Craske, and Miss Craske, I've decided not to be in the program. And she said, that's good, because she would have ruined the program. Meaning, not that I was such a bad dancer, but meaning that they had prepared it. You see, there was a discipline involved in all of this. You couldn't just go out and do what you wanted. So I wasn't. So what I was kind of like stage manager, and I helped them in the barn. We closed off the windows so that with dark material so that light wouldn't come in, and we had to de-wax the floor, which we were terrified of Elizabeth, you know, because she couldn't touch anything. And it was very hard because it was very slippery and sandy too, on top of it all. Well, the day came for the performance, and my job was to stand out on the back porch, which was the stage entrance, and Baba sat underneath a wagon wheel chandelier, and people sat behind him and to the side of him, and facing the back door, the one towards the beach. And I was out there on this door, and of course that was covered over with dark material, so you couldn't see through it. And every time someone had to go on to do their number, I would open the door and close the door, and when the music was over, I'd open the door, they'd come out and they'd close the door, and that was my job. And I think I was the only one, really do think that my claim to fame, I was the only one who not only didn't dance, but I didn't see it. So after it was over, somebody came out and said, Baba wants you all to come out, come back into the barn and be embraced by him. Thanks for having danced so well. So I opened the door and off they started to go in, and then they turned around and said, no, you have to go also. And I said, oh, no, I'm not going. I didn't do anything. And then my ego really came into play, and I said, I'm not going out there. I didn't do anything, and doesn't he know that I didn't do anything? What kind of avatar is he if he doesn't know I didn't? You know, I'm not going to have him embrace me and thank me, and he did, you know. So they insisted I go, and I went, and Baba embraced me, and that was fine. And to this day, it's kind of a memorable thing to me, especially since people come up to me, not so much anymore, because I think most of the people that saw this thing have gone into the beyond. the people would come up to me and say, "Oh, you were so beautiful when you danced for Baba," you know. So that was, and of course 58 was the time that Baba asked for the dancers to carry him in the chair, and I was one of those lucky men. There were 5 of us. We had a system of rotation so that there were only 4 places. So one would be not carrying, and then the next time that person would come on and one would go off. And the people in the front would go to the back because the front was the better place, because Baba would put his hands on, you know, and do things. And you've seen that in the movies. And one day, Baba said he asked to be carried around the center, and we stopped in front of every cabin. And that was a fantastic day because we got to carry him for a very long time, because usually it was from the car into the barn and back out again. But this was really carrying for a long time. And I thought, oh, isn't this wonderful? I'm in the front. I've got the best place. And I have to tell you, I used to be very jealous of Tex and Peter. When they were in the front, it seemed that Baba paid a lot of attention to them and slapped them and hit them and, you know, touched their head and whatever. And I thought, he never does that to me. So here I was in the front, very, very happy and full of myself that I got this great place. And Tex was the one not carrying, and he was walking along in front there, walked backwards, looking at us like this, you see. And as we went along, instead of enjoying it, I started feeling guilty. Tex isn't doing this, you know, and here I am, and I thought, no, this is my place, I got it fairly, I didn't cheat, I didn't push anybody, you know, I'm not giving it up, I'm not giving it up. And the more I thought about not giving it up, the more unhappy I got. And I just was in a state. And Tex, of course, would have to walk along looking backwards at us so that I could see his face, you know. And in the midst of this, you know, stupid quandary, I felt someone tap me on the shoulder, and it was Nariman. This I do remember because it's in a movie. And Nariman said to me, "Baba wants you to let Tex carry the chair for a while." So you see, I mean, that's like such a small thing, but such a big thing. He knows everything. Well, 58. Many, many things happened in 58. We had wonderful times with Baba in the lagoon cabin, very intimate times, where Baba would be joking with us and telling, you know, it was humorous and fun. One day, we went to the lagoon cabin, and Ms. Craske said, Baba has said that no one is to ask him for anything or ask any questions. Each person was told that not to ask for anything or ask any questions. So we went in, and we were very happily sitting on the floor, and there was one lady who was not a dancer, who shall remain nameless for the moment, and she was in there with us. I don't know how she got in there, but there she was sitting on the floor, and there was this sort of mood of rapture. I can't describe it. It was just wonderful. And all of a sudden, this woman looked up at Baba and said, "Oh, Baba, when can we come and be with you in India?" And his mood changed like instantaneously, and he became like thunderous, and he went out, and we fled out of the lagoon cabin, just like that. Don't ask me what that was about, but that's what happened. This person has always felt guilty about it, I think, but it wasn't her fault. 62, I went to India to see Baba at the East-West gathering. That was my 3rd time with Baba. And that was a very special time. It was the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis when we were leaving New York. We didn't think we were going to get out of New York, and everybody else thought New York was going to be blown up. And Bunty does anybody know Margaret Bernstein? I don't know, she was a baby, and Bunty left her in New York. And when we got to India, Baba said to Bunty, "Are you worried about Margaret?" And Bunty said, "No, not at all." And he said, "That's good, because if you worry about her, I won't." And that is a strange thing, because some of these things have kind of echoed down through the years and reverberated and come into other things will happen. And when I had to come down here just today, my mother is in the hospital, and she's very ill. She had a heart attack. And I thought, you know, should I cancel and call Marshall up and say I'm not coming? And then I thought, no, you promised to come, you have to go. And then that thing that Baba said came into my mind, you know, that I should come here and be here at the center and be with Baba. And anyway, these are things that with Baba, it's living. that does it. I don't know, everybody has a different way of coming to Baba. There's no one who can say, you have to do this, you have to do that. But my feeling for myself, it's been life, you know, and it hasn't been easy, and it hasn't been pretty often, and I haven't done the right thing many, many times, but who knows what the right thing is, because I think often the wrong thing is the very thing that, you know, shows you the right thing, in a sense, you know. And I think back of so many things that have happened. It's now, what is it, like 45 years. And it's Baba's birthday. And what is Baba's birthday? You know, it isn't really his birthday. I mean, his birthday is on another day in the Zoroastrian calendar. So what is it? It's a time to remember Baba, to be thankful to Baba for having come amongst us, to remember our lives with Baba. So many things, you know, and I have a message from where Baba sends, I'm just going to see if I can find, because I was talking with Andy over there, and this whole thing flew up in the air, and all the pages went all over the place. But it's very, very, it won't take me a minute, bear with me. I hope they don't fly up in the air again. But there they go. Just a sec. Okay. Just a minute, I'm getting there. No. See, I've had this sort of organized, but not really organized. Okay. This was a cable sent in 1968 on Baba's birthday. It says, on this, my apparent physical birthday, I send my homage and obeisance to my lovers who live for me and would, if ordered, die for me. Inform all lovers in New York and groups Eastern Seaboard, Meher Baba, my apparent physical birthday. And you know, Baba sent us cables on his birthday. And it wasn't, you know, it's not very usual for someone to... This one here, I think is really beautiful. It was 1962, Baba sent this cable. On this anniversary of my birthday, I give you my blessings for the death day of your false selves, and for the birthday in me of your one true self. He sent cables to us, to Miss Craske or to the dancers. February 23rd, 1957, Baba sent a cable to us, my love to you, my dancers and youngsters. He sent cables to Miss Craske on her birthdays. November 25th, 1964, I send my love to you, my dearest Margaret, who make others dance their way to my universal heart. February 21st, 1965, I am present with you all gathered in my love for my birthday. My love to you, each my dancers. November 25th, which was from Miss Craske, my love is with you on your birthday, and every day, my dearest Zuleika, which was the name he gave her. Keep my dancers dancing as moth round the light of my love you shine with. So, I wanted to just read a little bit of these letters, which are not spiritual documents, but show something about the way she was and the way we were with her. She was almost towards the end of her life, I asked Ms. Craske to sign one of her books to me, and I never really kind of looked at it, the signature, until much later, because Viola mentioned to me. And it says in the autograph, it's signed, your friend, Margaret Craske. So, very unusual for your teacher and your link to Baba to be your friend. Here's a cable about Dr. Kenmore, and on the bottom of it, she's written, hello, sweetie pie, here's news from Baba. This kind of humorous, light touch that she had. Hang on a second. Ms. Craske used to come down here in the summers, and I think she kind of had a hard time at Dilruba because it was always so crowded with people, and she always wanted to be alone. And she says at the end of this letter, Kitty sends kind regards. Many, many people here, cannot make them all out. I mean, those of you who know her can, you know. Just a second. I love this one. She never dated anything, so there's no way that we can archive this and put it in any order. Dear Donald, it was good of you to see me off safely on Saturday and for giving me a pleasant dinner. I always used to take her to the train or the plane when she'd come down here. That was my job. I never let anybody do it. I have told Kitty that you might like to come for the 10th, and she said that she could manage to put you up. I'm afraid in a room with many other people. I really do not know if the long, hot motorcycle journey would make it worthwhile for you to come. It would, however, be lovely if you so decided. The house, Elizabeth's, is full of people all the time, even at dinner time. This morning I shall go out on a search, not for anything spiritual, but for a spot where I can occasionally be alone. The situation here gives me the greatest understanding of Greta Garbo's famous whale. Let me know if you are coming. That's, Greta Garbo was, I want to be alone. So, I don't want to, and there's a very touching thing. She would write letters that would just, could you send me vitamin C or, or whatever. And she didn't, give me advice, spiritual advice or behavioral advice or anything. But there's a beautiful thing here. Buddy was the husband of Susan Rossin. I don't know if any of you ever met them, the Rossins. And he died of a heart attack so many years ago. And she says, Buddy came to see me a few hours before his coronary, and we talked of nothing but Baba, not his children, not Susan, his wife, only just love of Baba. And that's what I had tried to, in my mind, to talk about tonight, was she was so full of love for Baba that she drew us to Baba. And through that love, she awakened, you might say, the love in us. But it was never for her. It was always for Baba. And it was such a free and open approach. I now that Baba is physically not amongst us, and now that things have gone on, it's inevitable that we or somebody will try to formalize what Baba is and make up some kind of rules about it, or do's and don'ts, and Baba's stories which show that you should or shouldn't do something. But it wasn't like that. It wasn't like that with Baba. It wasn't like that in my experience with Miss Craske. Sure, he had people under his thumb, the Mondley, and that he gave specific orders to, and they were in training, you might say. But with us, we were given a long rope to go out and hang ourselves on or whatever, because that was the only way we could get rid of all this stuff. Not by reading in a book, don't do this, and then repressing it. And I have to say, I'm saying this is just what I feel. I'm not saying it like you should think that, but I'm just saying that's what I think. And I know, in my own case, I can't even imagine why I'm still here and following Baba. If all the things that I have done, were to count against me, this might open up at any moment, flame should. But very seriously, that's why Baba is so wonderful, because he's a personal relationship with each of us. And with each of us, it's different. And it should be that way. And Miss Craske always was very, very strong about not letting anything or anybody come between you and Baba. She had stories, you've heard some of her stories about her conflicts, like the one with the famous woman, Narina. Do you know that? This is kind of, she never liked it, but Kitty would always be very object to Miss Craske telling what she called these black stories. But I don't know, what is it, Narina? Who was it? It was Nadine Tolstoy, I think. Somebody came Nadine came to Miss Craske in India and said, you really should obey what Narina tells you to do. Narina was in charge of the household, and do what she says. And Miss Craske said, no, I'm not, I only, and this woman said, well, she's much higher than you. She's way up there on the spiritual ladder, and you don't even have your foot on the first rung. And Miss Craske said, that's all very well and good, but I don't need any Virgin Mary to come between me and Baba. I don't know if that's a bad story to tell, but it's a wonderful example. And that's how she was. In India, 1962, I remember very clearly, we were sitting in the dining hall at the Pune Club where we were staying, and it was like the first day, and a man came around, a doctor, and I don't know who he was, but he was somebody that we would know if we heard the name, and he was giving people aspirins or something. And everybody was taking them. And Miss Craske said, "Is this from Baba?" And he said, "No." And then she said, "Then I don't want it." That's how far she went with that idea, you see. So, I don't know, I don't want to say this is right and this is wrong but this is how I feel. Baba was free. He was free. And he was trapped in a way in us. And he bound himself in a way, but he was free. And his way was free. It's a new way. It's not an old way. Or maybe it's an old way, we don't know how the old ways were. You know what I'm saying? But it's not formulas. And he said it so clearly, I haven't come to teach but to awaken, and that's how he does it. Well, I think that each of the women that we knew, Kitty, Elizabeth, and Miss Craske, had a very unique, a different relationship with Baba. And I know that in Miss Craske's case, it was one of loving. Well, I don't mean to say that that's always what it was, but there was a kind of humorous exchange between them. There was a teasing, you know. He let her tease him, and he teased her. Like the wonderful story of how Baba used to play this game with her, where if she turned around, when she turned back, Baba would slap her face, you know, not hard. And because he would get her attention on something else, and she turned back. And then when Baba came, I guess it was in '56, I think, because there's a film of it, Miss Craske said to herself, "This is it. I'm not going to fall for that old trick again. Never, never, never." So evidently there was someplace, and she said Baba was facing her, looking at her, and all of a sudden he looked over her shoulder, and this look came over his face of this incredible love, like he'd seen somebody come into the room that he was, and so she turned around to see who it was, and he yeah.
You mentioned something about a motorcycle trip.
Yeah.
And the reason I ask is that I just recently came across some photographs which had belonged to Richard Bowler.
Oh yeah, that was on my motorcycle.
And she's on Margaret Craske is on a motorcycle.
Yes, and that was my motorcycle. That's the one. And that motorcycle had a name. Do you know what it was?
No.
Margaret. because I was driving down the street, and it was a BMW. It was very fancy, very nice. And I was driving down the street, and I saw her standing on the corner, and I pulled up, and she looked at me and said, "Oh, is that your new motorcycle?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And she said, "Oh, it's very nice. What do you call it?" And without thinking, I said, "Margaret." She went, and walked away. And she was very, very funny, Miss Craske. We would, before class with her, often I would stand and we would banter, you know. And like once Billy Eaton told me that there was a woman in California, if you sent your name, she could read your Akashic records, whatever they are, and tell you about 3 past lives. So I went to Miss Craske in the morning and said, "Oh, Miss Craske, have you heard about this woman in California that can tell you about past lives?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Yeah, you just send your name and she'll tell you 3 past lives." And she said, "Well, I don't want to know." And I said, "Well, aren't you interested?" She said, "No, I'm not." And I said, "Wouldn't you like to know what we were to each other in our past lives?" And she said, "Absolutely not." And I said, "Well, why?" She said, "Because you might have been my mother." And once she was sitting on this high stool. I don't know if anybody who's been to Baba House in New York, have you been there ever? The current Baba House, which is in the studio where she used to teach. There's a kind of high metal stool chair. That was the chair she sat in. And there she was on this stool, and I'm sitting there. I said, "Oh, Miss Craske, you know, I've been taking ginseng." And she said, "Oh, really? What's that for?" And I said, "Oh, well, I hear it. If you take ginseng, you can live to be over 100. She went, "Ah!" Like, you know, the thought of having to see me for another that many more years. And the wonderful story about her with Baba, where Baba and she were on a train somewhere, and he asked her to memorize some, whether it was a discourse, something that was a teaching, you know, she should memorize it, and when she knew it to heart, she had to come back and tell it to him in such a way that he really would understand it. So she went away and she memorized, and she came back, and there they sat, and she told Baba what this was and explained it to him, and he went, that's very good, I understood it perfectly well. And she looked at him and she said, "Oh, Baba, you're my first disciple." And he looked at her and he said, "And the last." Well, the motorcycle that was in the letter, you know, I had this idea to drive from New York down here on a motorcycle. I never did it, though. I never had the nerve to do it. Well, thank you all for having me here to talk about Baba. You know, if people think, they say, oh, thank you for coming and talking about Baba, but for me it's like, you know, thank you, because it brings Baba so wonderfully present, and it's a wonderful thing to do. Okay, that's it. Jai Baba.